Hello and welcome to Dialogue. 5 years after former U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, his successor, Joe Biden, is offering his own economic strategy for the region. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, expected to be launched soon, will be Biden's key initiative to keep America's preeminence across Asia. What will the U.S.-led economic framework bring to the increasingly important Asia-Pacific region? And how will countries in this region respond to Washington's new move? To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by Rong Ying, Vice President of the China Institute of International Studies, Rick Denham, former White House correspondent for Business Week, and Professor Madhav Nalapat, Vice Chairman of the Manipur Advanced Research Group. That's our topic. I'm Xu Qinduo. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. We know that U.S. is hosting a summit with ASEAN countries very soon, in mid-May actually. So many expect President Joe Biden will then launch this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or called IPEF, a concept that the Biden administration has been hinting basically at since last October. So let's take a look at the background. Professor Nalapat, please brief us, what is the background, against what kind of background this framework will be unveiled?
Well, the odds are that the conflict in Ukraine is going to continue, and the United States' attention is going to be still on that particular conflict, and therefore not so much on the Indo-Pacific. That's possibly the reason why this very important meeting with ASEAN, a really important grouping in the Indo-Pacific, has been postponed. So this is one of the issues. The other issue is that, President Biden is the most unpopular president in the US at this point in his term, ever since polling was introduced. So the reality is that any trade deal with the United States, a very friendly country, is of course very welcome to India, I'm sure to ASEAN, definitely to Japan, Australia, and other countries. But the reality is it has got to be on a level playing field. It can't be the US setting the rules and the US setting its rules for itself, so that, in the words of Catherine Tai, US consumers, US industries, they're the US workers, they're the only ones who benefit. All the partners should benefit equally. It should be a win-win kind of situation. So we'll have to wait and see what kind of a deal it is. If it is win-win, there is absolutely no doubt that it will be very welcome throughout the Indo-Pacific.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rong Ying, many people see this IPEF, this economic framework, as an important pillar to the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy, which also covers, obviously, security aspect or diplomatic aspect over there. Is that the case?
Yeah, I think observers in this region are certainly watching and following with great interest since President Biden announced that back in October last year that the United States would sort of put forward a kind of initiative named as the economic framework for the Indo-Pacific. And ever since then, we have seen its ministers, trade representative has been traveling to the region, trying to sell, to promote the idea. But the details, the specifics of the initiative has not yet been sort of clear, even though there are a lot of reports, speculations that it would be focusing on the so-called fair trade, focusing on the resilience of the supply chain, focusing on the question of like the infrastructure, green technology, and last but not least, about the so-called taxations and also anti-corruption things. Whatever the case, I think I would like to echo that to Professor Nalapat's view that this region has been enjoy a long-term peace, stability, and prosperity. And this region does not sort of have enough, actually have many sort of regional cooperation mechanism. And so the naturally a big question would be asking is what would be the added value for that, and what is the real purpose of the United States to put forward that. Of course, there are saying that the United States wanted to make up its sort of the economic aspect of this strategy for the region. But I think the Chinese always say that this region welcomes, I think, is looking for a kind of cooperative, inclusive sort of mechanism, does not want introduction or elements of making this region as a sort of a chessboard playground for major power rivalry. And if the United States was thinking of working with the region as an equal and for the common benefit and the development of the region, that's all right. Otherwise, there will be big questions. I think there will be big sort of issues could become problematic for the region.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, you know, as you mentioned, and you know, as part of the introduction, we mentioned TPP previously proposed by the United States was thrown away by President Trump, and then you know, that principle of that initiative is like people would call it ABC, like any country but China. What about this economic framework?
I think both the context of this and the domestic politics of the United States have to be considered. There was pretty much bipartisan support. A lot of Republicans joined with President Obama being in favor of Trans-Pacific Partnership. And there was division within parties. Hillary Clinton, the 2016 Democratic nominee, was lukewarm, and Donald Trump killed it. So I think that there's division in the United States on new economic trade partnerships in general. But there is bipartisan agreement on military partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region to try to contain China. And so it all leads to difficulties for Joe Biden. He will have a very difficult time getting anything through Congress because there's been no Republican support that we see right now, and Democrats are somewhat divided. Right now, what seems to be heading for is an executive action, so not something that would be a treaty, not something that would be binding. So it may be something that is more window dressing than actual reality. And the other question is India. India was not part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and China has applied to join the Trans-Pacific Partnership successor organization that the United States stepped out of. So the question is India. Without India, what is the Indo-Pacific Economic Agreement? And without market opening actions, concrete actions, is this anything more than just sort of political window dressing?
Mm-hmm. But how much do we know, like the Indians' attitudes toward this economic framework? We know India is very cautious in protecting its industry. After all, it's a developing country. Understandably, some of the industries need protection in order to grow at the primary stage. India was careful about, you know, RCEP, for example, this regional economic comprehensive deal, trade deal. So will India be ready to join this economic framework, or, you know, is there a strong interest, let's say, for participating in this framework?
Well, I'd like to say that India has got bilateral free trade agreements with almost all the countries that are members of RCEP. So we didn't see any particular value in joining RCEP, except a symbolic value that some financial papers will say, oh, India has come on board. The fact is that for most of the members of RCEP, we have got bilateral FTAs. And as you know, a few weeks ago, we signed a bilateral FTA with Australia. That was a bilateral FTA. And so that is the point. Now, regarding, I mean, the problem is that Donald Trump believed that he was a genius. He really believed it. So he tore up the Iran deal. He tore up TPP. thinking that people are going to be shocked and they're going to give him a much better deal, or the United States a better deal, and that never came. I thought TPP was a very good deal for the United States. I thought Iran was a very good deal for the United States, both negotiated by Obama. Trump tore it up, and frankly, the United States is a loser as a consequence of that. As far as India is concerned, look, I'm not sure that we can call us protectionists. I mean, for example, our trade with China has risen to $125 billion. It was about $100 billion 1 year ago. It's $125 billion, and about nearly $100 billion is actually imports from China. And just about $25 billion is exports from India. So I wouldn't call us protectionist exactly, but I would like to say that, yes, when the United States is concerned, pharma, services, items where India has a comparative advantage, we must say that the United States is a fairly friendly market. The US has understood you need cheap Indian pharma to ensure that healthcare costs do not go even more sky high than they are now. Vaccines, for example. The US tried to basically flood the world with its own hyper-cost vaccines until finally they got the message, and now they're producing a lot of vaccines in India that are cost-effective. So as far as India and the United States are concerned, on these matters, they are natural partners. As far as data is concerned, a lot of the data management in the United States is done by Indian Americans or by Indian citizens already. It's a natural partnership. It's come organically. So from the United States and India point of view, a lot of these are very promising. And assuming that we are not going to be subjected to all kinds of non-tariff barriers. Now, all these words like environment, climate, regulation, these have all been used in the past as catchwords for unfair non-tariff barriers by the United States and more particularly by Europe. We signed an FTA with Australia because Australians understood that and dropped a lot of that. The Europeans may understand that. We'll sign with them. The Brits are still being very obtuse and close-minded, so we have not yet signed with the Brits. But we have signed with the Australians. We'll probably sign with the Europeans, who seem more open-minded. So we are ready to sign with people who are open-minded, countries that are friends of ours. And I think we're looking forward. The United States, Europe, these are definitely locations that are friendly to India.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rong Yin, based on what Professor Nalapat has talked, obviously this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF, is different from like TPP previously, CPTPP right now, Trans-Pacific Partnership, or RCEP, right, RCEP, like Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. That includes the 10 ASEAN countries plus, I think, China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand, for example. So they are different, at least like for those, they are free trade agreement. Basically, it's about access of the market of each other or of the United States. But this economic framework is a bit different in that respect, at least, right?
Exactly. I think the problem we're having is that the United States knows very well it has very big and complicated domestic constraints on the question of free trade or having a traditional free trade agreement. That's why it came up with such kind of initiative, and thinking that it would continue to set the rules, set the so-called high standard rules that would be more beneficial for US itself. But that unfortunately raised a big question that how can it itself sort of make the case to the partners or potential participants for this initiative that it would be equally beneficial or mutually beneficial to the participants for that. I think our India colleagues, Professor Nalapat made a very strong case for that. And it is also because of in the region that there are different sort of level of development and also different sort of system way of governance. So if this sort of situation does not take into account, and I think it will be difficult to come up with a kind of arrangement like that. And the other issue, I think, related to this initiative, of course, is I think the United States, because of the domestic constraints, they are not able to sort of commit it to that by by having the congressional sort of support. So it is reported that most likely it would come with a kind of executive order. That, again, raises a question of durability. So if a new government comes, then who knows what would happen. So how can you expect the potential participants or members to that initiative would be sort of confident enough that these mechanisms, these rules, while they are binding to them, how they would be going to be affect to the United States.
Well, let's have a break. We'll continue our discussion right after this. Well, Rick, some U.S. partners believe the framework's success depends on the extent to which it can attract developing countries from Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the Pacific. Among the developing countries in the region, so far, which countries do we know they are eager to join, or which countries they probably be more reluctant or hesitant?
Well, I don't know if we really can tell so far. I think where you start is the Trans-Pacific Partnership countries. I mean, countries like Vietnam, I think that there would be a chance on countries like Indonesia. I mean, of course, you want the Pacific Rim nations like Japan and Korea to be a part of it, and Australia, obviously. But I think that the problem is more the Asian rather than the Pacific on the mainland. And the biggest question to me is India, and it's hard to say how do you have an Indo-Pacific agreement when you don't have India, and so to me that is the absolute biggest question. India is holding back for obvious reasons. And I say the number of nations involved is the biggest issue. The second is if you can have binding agreements. If you don't have binding agreements, this becomes a little more than a glorified think tank.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ruyong, back to you. Obviously, there are people who, I think from the U.S. side, basically this strategy, Indo-Pacific strategy, all this IPEF is viewed as a bait, to counter or to balance the rise of China in this region. But then again, China is the largest trading partner of basically every country or every economy in the region. So will the framework somehow affect China's economic cooperation with countries in the region, in particular, say, like ASEAN countries?
Well, I don't think that even though United States has a sort of intention to use initiative or strategy like that to balance or to pin down China, it would be impossible to do that. As you rightly said, China has now become almost the largest sort of trading partner for all the countries in the region. And we're going to have more and bigger and high quality relationship, because China and ASEAN are talking about the free trade, third point, it's the third version, the version 3, and so on and so forth. So I simply cannot understand the rationale, the logic for any initiative that meant to would be successful if it is planned or if it is sort of geared to aimed at containing China. Having said that, I see a lot of reports, a lot of sort of analysis, and a lot of certainly, I think, repeated efforts by the United States that they would hope to do that. But my sort of comment, my impression that it would, if the framework or if the initiative meant to do that, it would not succeed. It would fail, completely.
Mm-hmm. Professor Nallapad, interestingly, the two countries, two largest developing countries, China and India, On one hand, probably there's some reservation or reluctance on the Indian side to join the U.S. initiative, the economic framework. For China, China is basically being excluded from joining that economic framework. I don't know how do you make of that, but obviously China and India also, their trade has been growing rapidly, despite the border dispute, the problems between the two countries.
Well, China is now the second superpower in the world, and you're quite right. China's trade, my old friend Rong Ying is absolutely right. Its trade has grown exponentially because China has certain advantages for companies to invest in, and those advantages are helping China. I'd like to say this is the precise reason why, for example, Europe and India, the United States and India need to work together. Now, for example, the United States, it is going to lose the weapons market, the huge defense market that it has, to Russia mainly. The Russian weapons are good, they are lower priced, and they can outbid the United States in the Middle East, in ASEAN, and of course, and in India. Unless the United States weapons manufacturers have platforms in India where you can, in a sense, lower the overall cost and make them compete. The same with services. The United States or Europe cannot compete with China in services. So you have one very powerful country in terms of resources, Russia, a country extremely, absolutely historic changes in its rate of growth and in its ability to become a superpower in a short time, which is China. The only way that the European Union and the United States can compete with China will be a much better relationship with India. But as Dr. Rong Ying correctly said, it has got to be win-win. And the whole problem we are facing in India is that Joe Biden seems to be 50 years behind the times when the US was still dominant. The Europeans seem to be 100 years behind the times when Europe was dominant in the way they're dealing with some countries which have got a lower per capita income, but which in terms of geopolitics is much more important. So if the Europeans wake up that this is the 21st century, if the Americans wake up and say, oh my God, we are in the 21st century, we're not 50 years back, well, I think India will be happy to deal with both of them because we regard Europe and North America as good friends of ours. And if I may say so, and that friendship is a very strong friendship, but many of the policymakers at the top in Europe and America don't seem to be keeping up with the times in the way that European people are keeping up.
Mm-hmm. Well, Rick, President Biden promised in a very serious manner last year at the UN General Assembly, he said, quote, we are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks. Is there a concern, with IPEF economic framework, by excluding China, and probably some countries in the region will see like they are being pressured to choose side, for example, or probably Washington hope us will side with Washington against Beijing, or the other way around. Will that, be a danger that this region may be, divided?
Well, I think that's the paradox of what we're talking about today. This Indo-Pacific agreement, economic agreement, can't succeed if its goal is to divide the world in two, to the American-led trade zone and a Chinese-led trade zone. It has to be something that is focused on the future. It has to focus on green energy. It has to focus on technology, not the things of the past like my colleagues have talked about, like weaponry or even services. But let's look at supply chain durability in a time when we've had disruptions due to COVID and war. Let's if we make this an inclusive pact for the future, it could work. If it's trying to force nations to decide for one bloc or another, I think it's destined to fail both diplomatically and in terms of American domestic politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, a good point. What Rick has made is really about inclusive, probably usually involve both China, India, the United States, for example, in this region, Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific. Rongying, China largely has been open. China is part of the RCEP, this regional economic framework, economic cooperation partnership there. And also China has been applying to join this CPTPP and also a digital pact. So can we say that's probably the best response, to be open and to be part of the group? Who knows? Maybe if there's a success of this Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, China can be part of that.
Well, that's exactly, I think, the reason why China has been calling upon, I think, the United States and other sort of major power or major player in the region, that if they have some ideas in terms of economic cooperation or trade, please make sure that it's going to be inclusive, based on mutual respect, mutual benefit, and so on. And that is why, because as far as China is concerned, China is doing very well. China does not feel that agenda or anything like that would be able to, would be succeeding. Rather, it would create a big problem for the region by forcing or compelling the regional countries to take sides, and it would be undermined the prospect of that of the region. As far as China is concerned, I think it has been very clear, consistent in terms of opening up, in terms of reform, and it has been certainly one of the, together with Japan and ASEAN in particular, the strong advocate for that regional economic sort of trade arrangement, the RCEP, and China has been applying for CPTPP and also, I think, DPA. So China is working very hard along the line. China is providing a kind of alternative or option, the right way that how to promote the regional cooperation, how to promote trade, free trade, fair trade, and sort of trade facilitation. But I think China certainly would like to the others to follow the suit. On this regard, I think China again, or even with regard to US, I think China made it very, very clear it's ready to have more consultations, to have synergy, and possible cooperation and coordination along this line. So the ball is in the court of the United States.
Mm-hmm. Very briefly, Rick, we know that in mid-May, the U.S. is going to have a summit meeting with ASEAN countries. So what to expect?
I would expect to try to find what I would call the lowest common denominator kinds of agreements, to talk about what could be worked on together, and probably dealing both with some of the challenges of COVID, and then also technology type issues. I wouldn't expect anything too controversial, because Joe Biden wants successes. He doesn't want to go in and try to do something too ambitious that ends up failing and making him look weak. Yes.
Well, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.